A $100 million deal was moments away from being signed. The pen was already in billionaire Ethan Walker's hand, and then just 4 whispered words froze his entire world. No one paid attention to the waitress standing behind him, the one with dark circles under her eyes after an 8-hour shift. Her voice so soft it could have melted into the gentle piano playing through the golden air of Astor Restaurant. Yet those words, "The formula is wrong," fell like a hammer into the silence, shattering everything Ethan had believed to be certain. The room glowed under the amber light of chandeliers, thick with the scent of truffle-aged wine and power. Astor was where Chicago's elite came to finalize deals that could shake the entire energy market, and tonight, Table 12 was the center of that universe. Ethan Walker, 39, with a stern face, steel-gray eyes, and the calm authority of a man born to command, sat at the head of the table. To his left was Harold Whitman, a silver-haired banking magnate and symbol of the old guard. To his right sat Derek Cole, a venture capitalist from New York, his half-smile betraying the thrill of profit. Across from them, wearing arrogance like cologne, was Dr. Alan Mercer, director of R&D at Walker Innovations. Before them lay the open contract. Under the candlelight, the Mont Blanc pen shimmered like a ticking clock counting down to destiny. Ethan leaned forward, ready to sign when she appeared. Ella Brooks. The night shift waitress, 29 years old, moved with steps so light no one heard her. To them, she was a shadow, a pair of hands to pour water, carry plates, bow politely, then vanish. But inside those quiet eyes, a storm had been waiting for 6 long years. She stood there holding a pitcher of cold water, light reflecting in her deep gaze. When Mercer began scribbling an equation on a napkin, a complex formula that made investors nod in feigned understanding, Ella froze. That formula. She knew every symbol, every variable, every line of it, because she had written it. Memories surged like an electric shock, the old university lab at the University of Chicago, the sleepless nights before the whiteboard numbers swirling, and then the betrayal. She had once pointed out a flaw in the reaction model to Professor Leonard Graves, but he ignored her. Later, the entire research was published under his and Mercer's names. She was erased from history. And now that same formula, that same deadly mistake was about to form the foundation of a $100 million clean energy project. She knew that if Ethan signed it, it would cause not only financial devastation, but could cost lives. She wanted to turn away, but the image of the lab explosion from years ago flashed in her mind. The smoke, the blinding light, the screams. She couldn't let it happen again. As Ethan lowered the pen, she stepped forward. "Mr. Walker," her voice barely a breath. He didn't turn. "Don't sign. The formula is wrong." The table fell into silence. Harold looked up, squinting. Derek froze, his wine glass suspended midair. Mercer frowned, irritation and disbelief mixing on his face. Ethan slowly looked up. He turned toward the young woman in a black and white uniform. His eyes, those of a man who trusted only data, saw something that numbers could never capture: conviction. "What did you just say?" he asked quietly. "The formula is wrong," Ella repeated this time, steady, her voice low but firm, like a vow. The air grew heavy. Mercer let out a dry laugh. "A waitress is telling me my formula is wrong. That's hilarious." But Ethan didn't laugh. He set the pen down. A small voice, a single phrase, had just stopped an empire in its tracks. He felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but instinct. The same instinct that had made him billions when something doesn't fit. Stop. And he did stop for those 4 simple words. As Ella watched the pen move away from the paper, she knew she had crossed a line she could never return from. She might lose her job, her reputation, everything, but at least she hadn't lost her conscience. That night, Astor still glowed with golden light, but in that moment, only two people were truly awake: a billionaire on the brink of losing everything, and a waitress on the verge of reclaiming her entire life. In that moment, every sound inside Astor seemed to vanish. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of wealthy conversations, even the smooth jazz playing in the background, all faded away. Only the eyes of Ethan Walker and Ella Brooks remained locked across the golden glow of the room, two worlds colliding, trying to understand what they had just stumbled upon. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his voice low and sharp, slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "Did you just say the formula is wrong?" Ella stood tall, her hand still gripping the water pitcher, trembling slightly, but her gaze steady. "Yes, sir. Critically wrong." Across the table, Alan Mercer let out a forced laugh, trying to sound composed, but the veins on his neck had begun to bulge. "Ethan, you can't be serious. Who is she? A waitress, not a chemist." "But you're shaking." "Alan," Ethan replied quietly, his voice slow, deliberate, yet carrying enough weight for everyone to hear. No one spoke. Harold Whitman cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the tension. "Perhaps we could continue dinner. I'm sure Mr. Walker will handle this later." But Ethan didn't move. He placed the Mont Blanc pen on the table carefully, yet the faint click it made sounded like a gunshot. His eyes locked onto Ella. "Explain." Her heart pounded, yet her voice was unnervingly calm. "The terminology in Dr. Mercer's equation. The tunneling probability term is defined incorrectly. If that model is applied under high-pressure conditions, the reaction will destabilize and produce a byproduct that could explode." No one fully grasped what she said, but Ethan understood enough. His face changed as equations and charts flashed through his mind like a collapsing matrix. Mercer shot up, his voice rising. "Nonsense! She's talking gibberish to get attention. I wrote that research. I know exactly how it works." Ella turned to him, her eyes cold, not fearful, only filled with quiet contempt. "Because you stole it." The air froze solid. Harold nearly dropped his wineglass. Derek looked up, his mouth hanging open. Mercer's face turned pale as he swallowed hard, his throat dry. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Stole it." "Yes." Ella said, her tone no longer that of a waitress, but of a scientist betrayed. "I'm the one who created that formula. 6 years ago at the University of Chicago, I discovered the error in the model and reported it to my advisor, Professor Leonard Graves. But instead of correcting it, he published the research under his own name and with Alan Mercer, who was his graduate student at the time." Each word cut through the silence like a blade. Mercer flushed, crimson sweat breaking on his forehead as he forced a crooked smile. "She's lying." "That's absurd!" "Enough," Ethan interrupted. His voice wasn't loud yet. It silenced the entire room. He studied Ella for a long moment, as if searching for hidden layers of truth beneath her eyes. "Do you have proof?" "No," she said softly. "They erased everything. My name, my data, my records. All I have left is my memory and the formula in my head." Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling quietly. He didn't know who she was, but he knew one thing: no one could speak about science like that unless they had lived inside it. He turned to Mercer. "I want verification." "Right now!" Mercer looked as if he had been struck by lightning. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous. This is a signing dinner, not a lab." Ethan stood up. The sound of the chair scraping across the polished wooden floor cut through the air like glass. "The signing is suspended. I don't spend hundreds of millions of dollars on something whose author can't defend it with logic." He turned to Harold and Derek, his tone cool but polite. "Gentlemen, my apologies for the interruption. I'll have all the data rechecked. Please charge the entire evening to my account." Then he looked back at Ella, his voice firm. "You're coming with me." Ella froze. "Sir, That's not a request," Ethan said and walked away. Every gaze in the restaurant followed them, a billionaire in a black suit, and the small waitress walking beside him through a crowd stunned into silence. The manager, Francois, rushed forward, face pale. "Miss Brooks, where are you going? You just ruined Mr. Walker's entire event." Before Ella could answer, Ethan stopped at the door and turned his voice carrying clearly without needing to raise it. "She's coming with me, Francois. Put every expense on my bill." No one dared move. Ella untied her apron and laid it on the service counter. Her steps trembled, yet each one felt as heavy as 6 years of silence. Outside, the Chicago wind roared, city lights glinting off the skyscrapers like molten metal. The restaurant door closed behind her, and with it, Ella's old life came to an end. The black Maybach glided down Michigan Avenue at midnight, neon lights streaking across its surface like trails of fire on metal. Inside, the cabin was silent. The engine purred so smoothly that the only sound was the tense breathing of two people facing each other, Ethan Walker and Ella Brooks. She sat on the edge of her seat, hands tightly clasped together. The dark uniform made her look even smaller against the cream leather interior. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast, erratic, filled with fear. Fear of what awaited her, and fear of what she had just done. Ethan stared out the window, his gaze sharp and reflective, slicing through the night like a blade. Questions raced through his mind. Who was she? How did she know that detail? And if she was right, had he just avoided disaster or stepped into another kind of trap? It wasn't until the car turned into the financial district that he finally spoke. "What's your name?" "Ella Brooks," she answered softly, her voice hoarse from tension. "How long have you worked at Astor?" "5 years. And before that?" She looked up, hesitating for a second, as if about to reveal a secret long buried. "Before that, I was a PhD student at the University of Chicago. Quantum chemistry." Ethan turned sharply. For the first time that evening, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face. "You studied quantum chemistry, and now you're a waitress?" "Not a PhD," she said quietly. "I left before defending my dissertation." The car sped into the underground garage of Walker Tower, the company's headquarters. The door opened, and they stepped into a private elevator. When the metal doors slid shut, the mirrored walls reflected two opposites: a billionaire in a perfectly tailored suit and a woman in a stained uniform, hair tousled, eyes shadowed. Ethan leaned lightly against the wall, his voice dropping lower. "Why did you quit?" The question made Ella freeze. She looked down at her worn shoes as if they carried the weight of her entire story. "Because I was betrayed," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "My advisor, Professor Leonard Graves, and his assistant, Alan Mercer. I discovered an error in my model and reported it. A week later, the research was published without my name." Ethan straightened his eyes, lighting up with a mix of realization and anger as the pieces began to connect. "The work by Graves and Mercer, that's the foundation of my current project." Ella nodded. "And that error was never fixed. If you had signed that deal tonight, your production line could have exploded, all because of one ignored variable." Ethan stepped out of the elevator, leading her to the top floor of his office. The glass walls surrounded the Chicago skyline, city lights shimmering like an ocean of stars. In that cold, vast room, the black obsidian desk reflected his image like a sharp blade. He turned to her and gestured for her to sit. "You understand that I just stopped the biggest deal of my career based solely on your words?" Ella nodded. "I know, and I know I'll be seen as a lunatic, but if I had stayed silent, you would have lost far more than money." He studied her for a long moment. For the first time, Ethan heard something in her voice, not confidence but truth, the kind of conviction that couldn't be faked. He activated the security system locking the office doors. His tone grew firm, deliberate. If you're right, you just saved this entire company. If you're wrong, you've destroyed your life. I need to know, how sure are you? 100%, Ella said without hesitation. Mathematics doesn't lie. A long silence followed. Then Ethan walked to the desk and unlocked his tablet. I have a degree in engineering physics. I'll ask you a few questions. If you truly understand that formula, I'll know. He began firing off questions about spin-orbit coupling, relativistic effects, and proton transfer energy in iridium crystal lattices. Ella answered instantly, her hand moving swiftly across the digital board, rewriting equations, correcting symbols with precision. The room glowed with the soft blue light of the screen, the faint scratch of the stylus, the only sound. In that moment, the waitress was gone, replaced by the scientist she had always been, her eyes burning with a passion suppressed for 6 long years. Ethan watched her lowering his pen slowly. Every trace of doubt dissolved, replaced by awe and respect. "You're not just right," he said, his voice low, resonant like distant thunder. "You just saved me from $100 million bomb." Ella exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. For the first time that night, she smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "No, Mr. Walker," she whispered softly. "I just saved my own work." Outside, dawn broke. The first light of morning spilled through the glass, bathing them in a warm golden glow. In that moment, the darkness of 6 years began to fade, and a new chapter quietly began. Dawn spilled into the 60th floor of Walker Tower, painting streaks of amber and gold across the vast glass walls. The city of Chicago was waking up, but inside Ethan Walker's office, time no longer existed. The woman who had worn a waitress uniform the night before now sat in the glass conference room, a whiteboard before her covered in symbols and equations. Her eyes burned with intensity. Her hands moved swiftly, as if she were rewriting her own destiny. Ella Brooks, the woman erased from the world of science, was proving she had never truly disappeared. Ethan stood nearby, arms crossed, watching in silence. His face remained calm, but his eyes reflected astonishment mixed with admiration. He had met countless experts, PhDs, and top engineers, but none had ever spoken of science with such conviction, a voice so alive that even the coldest numbers seemed to breathe. Dr. Mercer's formula. Ella said, pointing at the board, is missing the relativistic correction factor in the tunneling probability function. Once pressure exceeds 2.5 gigapascals, electron density changes. He assumed it remained constant, but it doesn't. The result is chaos, in the reaction generating excess energy, a chain of explosions. Ethan nodded his eyes, following every line of chalk. "And you discovered this 6 years ago?" Ella set the marker down, her shoulders trembling slightly. "Yes. I was 23. I found the discrepancy a week before my defense. I told Professor Graves. He said I was overanalyzing, that I was sabotaging my own work. Then weeks later, they published the paper, under his name and Mercer's." Her voice caught, carrying a trace of bitterness. "I tried to file a complaint, but they had lawyers, reputation influence. I had nothing but a suitcase and $50,000 in student debt. I had no choice but to leave. Since then, I've only been waiting tables." The room fell silent. Light from the rising sun touched her face, a face that looked both fragile and fierce at once. Ethan turned away, gazing out the window. "They didn't just steal your research, they tried to bury it." His voice dropped. "If I had signed that contract last night, the entire green hydrogen project of Walker Innovations would have become fuel for a global scandal. Stock prices would crash. Thousands of employees would lose their jobs, maybe even their lives." He turned back to her. "You didn't just save me. You saved the company." Ella gave a faint, weary smile. I only wanted to stop the mistake from happening again. No one deserves to pay for someone else's greed. Ethan studied her for a long time, then walked to the glass control panel at the center of the room. A series of lights flickered on, displaying the layout of the company's R&D servers. You said Mercer and Graves modified the original model. That means all experimental data has been tampered with. I need your help to prove it. Ella froze for a moment. You mean you're giving me access to internal data? Not regular data, Ethan replied. Level 1 clearance access only I possess. He handed her his personal security card, his voice steady. I'm giving this to you. Find me proof. I need to know what he did and why. She looked at the card in her hand, its green light reflecting in her eyes. 6 years ago, she had been thrown out of a laboratory, stripped of her identity as a researcher. Now a billionaire was handing her the key to reclaim everything. You trust me that much? She asked quietly. No. Ethan said, a faint smile touching his lips. I trust logic. And logic tells me you're the only person on this planet who truly understands this work. He pressed a command on the control panel. The glass walls dimmed and the conference room shifted into secure mode. I have a meeting with investors in 2 hours. You'll have that time. Mercer's data is stored in the Delta R&D lab on the lower floor. Whatever you need, ask for it. I'll make sure you're protected. Ella took a deep breath. I'll get it done. The door slid open, white light from the technical corridor spilling across her face. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only fire, the same fire Graves and Mercer had once thought they'd extinguished forever. As she stepped out, Ethan watched her go, feeling something unfamiliar, not just gratitude, but trust. A rare kind of trust he had never given anyone in his world. Outside, the sun climbed higher, reflecting off the glass towers like blades of light. And somewhere, in the heart of Chicago, the flame of justice had just been reignited. The Delta R&D laboratory lay deep beneath Walker Tower, a cold labyrinth of steel glass and white light. As Ella Brooks stepped through the automatic security doors, it felt as if she had returned to her old world, the one she had once belonged to, where everything revolved around formulas, data, and the belief that science was the purest form of truth. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving her alone in a vast, silent space. The familiar scent of ozone metal and solvents made her heartbeat quicken. 6 years of waiting tables could not erase the instincts of a researcher. Every step, every movement she made was precise, calculated, automatic. In front of her, the holographic display lit up. A notification appeared. Access Level 1 granted. User Ella Brooks, authorized by E. Walker. The feeling was surreal. A woman once cast out of academia now sat inside a multi-million-dollar laboratory with the highest clearance in her hands. She took a deep breath and whispered, "All right, Mercer. Let's see what you've been hiding in the dark." She didn't waste time on polished reports or carefully edited presentations. She went straight to the core of the system, the raw data from actual experiments. Because the truth, if it existed, would live there. Lines of data streamed across the display, flickering like a river of light. Ella navigated through thousands of sensor logs, pressure simulations, temperature readings, and reaction rates. She knew exactly what to look for. 1 hour passed, then 2. The glow of the screen illuminated her face, weary yet unwavering. And then she found it. Log number E-23-0607. A high-pressure catalytic simulation. The report stated that results were perfect stable energy, no anomalies. But deep inside the machine-level log, she found an entry flagged as sensor error. She decoded it. Instantly, the graph shifted. A red line shot upward like a blade. Energy levels spiked 400% in just 0.002 of a second. a virtual explosion, exactly what she had warned about 6 years earlier. "My God," she whispered, eyes widening. I was right. But what made her blood run cold was what followed. The system's autocorrection protocol had flagged the anomaly and then fixed it by multiplying the result by a stability coefficient of 0.25, a falsification algorithm. Someone had programmed it to make everything appear perfect. Ella leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. "You knew," she murmured, voice trembling, "and you covered it up." She began tracing the code. The script was sophisticated, nearly undetectable under standard audits. But every coder leaves a fingerprint, a digital signature. And she found it. A. Mercer. "You," she whispered, breath catching. "It was you." She kept digging deeper. The system opened a hidden directory embedded in the operating kernel, labeled LG contingency. LG. She frowned. Leonard Graves. The folder was heavily encrypted. Ella began typing running decryption sequences, guessing patterns, trying dozens of combinations. The screen flashed, access denied, again and again, until she remembered something Graves used to say during every lab session. "Subtle is the Lord, but malicious he is not." She typed the quote in German into the password field. Decryption successful. The folder opened. 2 files appeared. 1 ledger PDF, 2 audio.mp3. Ella opened the first. Streams of data filled the screen. Digital transactions routed through anonymous accounts. Total amount $5 million. Sender a shell corporation named Hale Energy Holdings, a subsidiary of Richard Hale's rival conglomerate. Recipient A. Mercer. Her hands trembled. The pieces were falling into place. Mercer had been paid to sabotage Walker Innovations from the inside. She opened the audio file. 2 male voices echoed faintly. "Sterling will sign tomorrow," Mercer's voice said. "After that, we send the real data to the EPA. They'll shut his project down. The stock will crash, and you'll buy up all his patents for pennies." Another voice, smooth and cold as a knife, replied. "And the stabilization formula." "The girl already solved it years ago," Mercer said, triumphant. "Graves kept the original. When the time comes, we'll sell it back." Ella froze. Each word struck like a knife to the chest. They hadn't just stolen her work, they had sold it like merchandise. She saved both files to an external drive. Outside, the wall clock read 3 o'clock in the morning. The lab lights flickered once. Then a red warning flashed across the screen, "Unauthorized access detected Sector 7G." Someone else was trying to enter the system, and the name that appeared on the monitor made her blood run cold. User A. Mercer. The silence of the lab was gone. A storm was coming, and it carried the hand of the man who had stolen her life. Red warning lights swept across the lab, flashing endlessly like the frantic heartbeat of the building itself. The faint sound of alarms hummed through the security system, blending with the whir of cooling fans and Ella Brooks's ragged breathing. On the holographic screen, the words, "User A. Mercer. Access Level 1 detected," flickered repeatedly. "No, that's impossible," she whispered. "He's not supposed to have Level 1 clearance." Then she saw it, a line of text flashing across the interface. "Remote deletion command initiated. Target LG contingency, the folder holding all the evidence." If that command completed, everything would vanish. The crime, the justice, her entire life. Ella didn't hesitate. She opened the auxiliary control panel and typed in the emergency override code. Ethan Walker had given her override Level 1 emergency lockdown. The screen blazed bright. Lines of system text appeared in rapid succession. Network connection terminated. System status isolated mode activated. Security protocol full lockdown. "That's it," she gasped. "He can't delete anything now." But then came a sound that made her entire body freeze, the screech of metal from the corridor outside. The main lab door slammed shut with a heavy click as the magnetic locks engaged. The system had sealed off the entire Delta R&D sector. Ella had just trapped herself inside. The red light swept across her face, reflecting the flicker of fear in her eyes, but fear quickly gave way to something sharper, pure instinct. From down the hall came footsteps, slow at first, then faster. She knew that sound. Alan Mercer. He was here. Ella backed up her spine, pressing against the cold glass wall, eyes darting around. The room was nearly empty. Only servers, screens, a steel table, and a chair. No weapons, no exit. She yanked the external drive from the console and shoved it into her pocket. Cold sweat ran down her neck. She opened the security interface, searching for an escape route. None. Every electronic door was sealed. A loud bang echoed from outside. Ella Mercer's voice roared hoarse with fury. "You think you can go against me? You're nothing but a failed experiment." She bit her lip, forcing herself to stay calm. In her mind, she traced the floor plan. There was one way out, the maintenance shaft connecting this lab to the service storage area. The only exit left. She dashed to the far corner, pulling off the steel panel covering the air duct. It was bolted down by 4 large screws. No screwdriver. She looked around, grabbed a metal chair, and slammed it against the panel. The crash echoed through the lab. One bolt popped loose, then another. Mercer pounded the door again, his voice cracking with rage. "You don't understand. If you expose this, the entire company will collapse. No one will believe a Waitress." Ella didn't respond. She struck again, harder this time, her breathing rapid, tears mixing with sweat. The final bolt came loose. The steel plate clattered to the floor, revealing a narrow, dark opening. She glanced at the door. The lock light was still blinking red. He hadn't broken through yet, but it was only a matter of time. Dropping to her knees, she crawled into the narrow duct. The air was cold metallic, filled with dust. Behind her, she heard the shrill whine of a power drill. Mercer was cutting through the lock. Come on," she muttered, pulling the panel shut behind her. In the darkness, she turned on her phone's flashlight. The weak beam glimmered against silver tubing. She crawled forward inch by inch, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The metal scraped her palms raw. The wind that hissed through the vents sounded like whispers. Behind her, a thunderous crash shook the duct. The door had given way. Mercer's voice echoed through the hollow chamber, furious and close. "You think you can run, you stupid girl?" Ella held her breath. The sound of his footsteps pounded against the lab floor, then stopped. Only the hum of air and her pulse remained. She kept crawling faster, turning left, then right. The light flickered. Each time it dimmed, she imagined his shadow crawling closer. But she didn't stop. The duct opened into a vertical shaft. She grabbed the steel rungs and slid down 2 levels, her hands bleeding from the friction. When she landed, dust exploded around her. In front of her stood an emergency maintenance door leading to the technical corridor. She shoved it hard. It burst open. The hallway light flooded in. In the distance, the security alarms wailed. The system had detected an intruder. Ella sprinted down the corridor, clutching the drive to her chest. Everything inside her was focused on one thing: getting out and getting the evidence to Ethan. Behind her came the sound of footsteps, heavy, fast, relentless. Mercer had entered the ducts, but this time he wasn't just trying to hide his crimes. He was hunting the only person who could expose them. And deep inside Walker Tower, the chase had begun. The maintenance corridor stretched endlessly ahead, emergency lights flashing in slow, rhythmic pulses like the breath of a giant beast sleeping beneath the building. Ella Brooks's footsteps echoed sharply, quick and desperate, mixing with the clang of metal and the hiss of air from the ventilation system. In her hand, she clutched the small black hard drive, the only thing containing all the evidence against Alan Mercer and Professor Leonard Graves. She had been running for several minutes, too afraid to look back. But when the sound of leather shoes began to echo from behind, she knew he was still there. Mercer, the man who had stolen her work, betrayed her and was now willing to kill, to erase the evidence. His voice rang out, warped with rage. "Ella! Stop! You don't understand! We can make a deal!" She didn't answer. Her shoes slipped on the metal floor, her throat burning with every breath. Years of waiting tables had made her quick and agile, but now her legs trembled, her heart pounding violently in her chest. Ahead she saw a sign glowing faintly red, "Exit Maintenance Shaft." If she could reach it, she could get down to the lower floors and maybe reach the main lobby. But then Mercer stopped shouting. He went silent. And that silence was more terrifying than his threats. Ella turned sharply down a junction and darted into a dark maintenance storage room lit by only a few flickering fluorescent tubes. She slid behind a shelf stacked with metal toolboxes, pressing the hard drive tightly against her chest. The heavy door creaked open. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, calculated. Ella Mercer's voice called out soft but chilling. "I know you're here. You're smart but naive. You think Walker will protect you? He's a businessman, not a hero. When this gets out, he'll throw you to the wolves to save his stock price." She bit her lip, holding her breath. "But me?" Mercer continued. "I can fix this. If you hand over that drive, I can make this go away. You'll get compensation enough to start over." He stopped walking. His steps were now right behind the shelf. Ella could see his shadow cast across the wall, tall, broad, holding a power drill. The spinning bit caught the light, whirring with a metallic hum that made her skin crawl. "I'll count to 3, he said. "If you don't come out, I'll treat this like a lab test and start drilling." Ella closed her eyes, forcing the fear back down. Images flooded her mind. Her sick mother. The rejection letter for her dissertation the night she cried alone in her tiny apartment. 6 years of silence. No more. When Mercer reached 2, she grabbed a pressurized air hose from the wall and yanked it free. The burst of compressed gas shot out like a silver arrow, forcing him to flinch and raise his arm. Ella didn't waste a second. She hurled a metal toolbox at him, the sharp corner slamming into his shoulder. "You bastard!" she shouted, sprinting from her hiding place toward the side door. Mercer roared and charged after her. She slammed into the exit, but the electronic lock flashed red. The building was still under full lockdown. She pulled out Ethan's access card and scanned it against the reader. A sharp beep, then the light turned green. The door hissed open. Cold air flooded the hallway as she burst out into the main technical corridor, gasping. At the far end, a stairwell led up toward the commercial levels. She ran, grabbing the wall intercom as she passed. "Security, this is Ella Brooks. There's an intruder in Delta Sector. His name is Alan Mercer. Before she could finish, Mercer appeared behind her, ripping the cord from the wall. She was yanked backward, crashing hard onto the floor, sliding across the metal surface until her shoulder slammed into the railing. The hard drive flew from her hand, clattering across the floor until it stopped at the base of the stairs. Mercer slowed his pace, panting heavily. "You've made this worse than it ever had to be, Ella. Let's end this." He bent down to grab the drive, but before he could stand, every overhead light blazed to life, and alarms roared through the corridor. From the far end, 4 security officers from Walker Innovations sprinted forward, led by Chief of Security Gavin Miles. "Drop it, Dr. Mercer!" Gavin shouted. Mercer spun around, his face pale with panic. He backed up, eyes darting, searching for an escape, but behind him stood Ella, blood streaking down her forehead, her eyes burning like molten steel. "It's over," she said quietly. "And this time, you can't delete the evidence." Gavin closed in, wrenching the drive from Mercer's grip and snapping a steel cuff around his wrist. Mercer struggled, shouting wildly, "She's destroying everything! She'll kill this company!" Ella met his gaze, steady and cold. "No," she said softly. "I'm saving it." She turned to Gavin, breathless. "Get that drive to Mr. Walker. Now." As Mercer was dragged away, Ella sank to the floor, her breath breaking into shaky gasps. Every muscle in her body trembled. But for the first time in years, she felt light, as if a stone she had carried for 6 years had finally been lifted. Somewhere above them, dawn was breaking through the tower's glass windows. The first rays of morning sunlight fell across her face, shining on the woman who had just reclaimed the truth. Ella Brooks, the nameless waitress, had just saved an empire. As Ella Brooks stepped out of the Delta R&D sector, the cold air from the ventilation system brushed against her dust and blood-streaked face. She had thought she would die down there, but now in her hands and in the hard drive Gavin Miles was holding lay a truth the world had never known. She entered the emergency elevator, her eyes red but burning bright. On the 60th floor, where dawn was spilling through the glass walls, Ethan Walker was waiting. He stood facing the window, his black suit still immaculate, but his expression heavy as stone. When the elevator doors opened, he turned and saw Ella. She barely recognized herself. Her hair was tangled, her shirt stained with grime, her shoulder bleeding, but her eyes remained steady. Before she could speak, Gavin stepped forward and handed Ethan the drive. "She says this has everything, sir." Ethan took it and connected it to the central projector. Lines of data flooded the screen, the ledger, the hidden code and the audio file, the voices of Alan Mercer and Richard Hale, CEO of Hale Energy. "Sterling will sign tomorrow. After that, we send the real data to the EPA. He'll drown in lawsuits, and you'll buy his patents for scraps. And the stabilization formula. The girl already solved it. Graves has the original. When the time comes, we'll sell it back." The recording echoed through the sleek office, every word cutting into Ethan like a blade. His fists clenched, his knuckles pale. All the doubts, all the vague connections that had haunted him through the night, now snapped into focus. Mercer hadn't just lied, he had betrayed him. Gavin exhaled. "We'll turn all this over to the FBI. I'll keep him in the internal holding room until the agents arrive." "Do it," Ethan said, his voice cold as steel. "And make sure Graves and Hale don't have time to run." He turned to Ella. "Are you all right?" She nodded, exhausted, but still standing tall. "I'm fine. I just still can't believe justice actually exists." A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "Justice doesn't just happen. People like you drag it back into the world." A soft chime sounded. The conference system connected automatically. On the large screen appeared the faces of Harold Whitman and Derek Cole, the investors who had received an urgent summons. "Walker." "What's going on?" Whitman demanded. "The signing's been delayed and Mercer's been arrested." Ethan motioned for Ella to sit beside him. His voice was clear and resolute. "Gentlemen, I've uncovered undeniable evidence that Dr. Mercer and Professor Graves falsified data in the HydroX project. They took a $5 million bribe from a rival corporation to sabotage our company. And the person who saved us from disaster is sitting beside me, Ella Brooks." Whitman and Cole exchanged startled looks. "A waitress?" "No," Ethan replied, his tone full of pride. "A scientist who was stripped of her work and the one who created the correct formula for the catalyst we've been developing." He opened a slide projecting the equations Ella had written. "This is the corrected version hers. I've verified it. It's not only safe, it's 20% more efficient than Mercer's falsified model." The room fell silent. Then Harold Whitman let out a slow breath, his expression shifting from doubt to admiration. "Walker, you just saved us from a historic collapse." "No," Ethan said, glancing toward Ella. "She did." Derek Cole leaned toward the camera. "Miss Brooks, if you ever want to return to research, I'm sure many institutions would welcome you." Ella shook her head. "I don't want to go back to a place that buried me. I want to build one where people like me can't be silenced." Ethan smiled faintly. "I was thinking the same thing." He turned to the investors. "I want to establish a subsidiary under Walker Innovations Brooks Walker Energy, with Miss Brooks as Chief Technology Officer. Full research authority, 25% equity. If you still want to invest, this is the project truly worth betting on." Harold laughed for the first time since the tense morning began. A company born from a woman brave enough to stop her boss from signing the wrong deal. I like that kind of courage. Derek nodded. "So do I. Send me the new terms, Walker. I'll sign before the day's over." Ethan ended the call and turned to Ella. She was still stunned, unable to fully grasp that everything was real. "You've just taken back everything they stole from you," he said gently. "But more importantly, you've proven that honesty can save the world." Ella looked toward the window. The Chicago sun had fully risen, spilling through the crystal-clear glass. Its light fell across her face, reflecting the image of a woman once humiliated, now standing tall in her own truth. And somewhere in that quiet moment, justice was finally served. 6 months later, Chicago wore a new face. The skyscrapers shimmered beneath the radiant sunlight, reflecting the spirit of a new era in clean energy. In the heart of the Southern Technology District, a towering sign gleamed proudly in the wind: Brooks Walker Energy Innovation Center. Inside the central laboratory, Ella Brooks stood before a 3-story glass wall, her white lab coat spotless. Around her, a team of young scientists watched with anticipation, their eyes alive with purpose. Before them stood the Hydro-X reactor version 2.0, the culmination of faith knowledge and countless sleepless nights about to be activated for the first time. "Pressure stable, temperature nominal," a technician reported. "Begin the sequence," Ella said softly. The main screen flickered to life. Data streams climbed sharply, then steadied at 78% efficiency, higher than any number ever recorded in the industry. The entire room erupted in cheers. At the back, Ethan Walker smiled, arms crossed, his usual composure replaced by something lighter, freer, like a man who had finally stepped out of the shadows. "You just did what the world said was impossible," he said. Ella turned toward him with a gentle smile. "No, we did it," she replied. Because this time, no one was forced into silence. She walked closer to the glass wall, gazing out at the city. The river below glittered under the morning sun, the same place where she had once served glasses of water, her dreams buried deep. Now those dreams illuminated the skyline. On the work table behind her hung a framed white napkin, displayed with quiet reverence. On it, the completed equation, the Brooks equation, was written in her hand, small yet steady. Beneath the formula was a single symbol, a slanted lowercase r representing one word: resilience. Outside, the world moved on. But for Ella, time seemed to pause in a moment of absolute stillness, the moment she finally understood that justice was not only about punishment, but about living in the truth of one's own worth. That morning, every national financial network aired the same headline: Richard Hale, CEO of Hale Energy, along with Professor Leonard Graves and Dr. Alan Mercer, indicted for charges of industrial espionage and scientific fraud. In an office bathed in sunlight, Ethan Walker set his tablet down and looked toward Ella Brooks, who sat quietly reading the latest experimental report. "Justice has finally reached where it needed to go," he said, his voice low but relieved. Ella smiled. Not the smile of someone who had won, but of someone who had been freed. "It's not because they were punished," she replied softly, "but because the truth was finally heard." She turned toward the window, where the morning sun poured golden light over the city. From above, she could see the rush of people below, ordinary men and women going about their daily work. "They don't know my name," she thought, "but I know they're the reason I had to speak up." Ethan stepped closer and placed a small picture frame on her desk. Inside was an old photograph: Ella in her waitress uniform, holding a tray of glasses, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "Keep it," he said. "To remind you that strength doesn't come from titles, but from having the courage to speak the truth." She looked at the photo, her throat tightening. 6 years ago, she was the one erased from an equation. Now her name itself had become a formula for belief. Ethan smiled gently. "I used to think money could buy the most important things in life. But those 4 words you said that night changed everything about how I live." "The formula is wrong?" she asked, half joking, half moved. "No," he said, his gaze softening. "The truth is right." Outside, the morning light reflected off the sign reading, "Brooks Walker, energy gleaming against the Chicago sky. A reminder that in a world built on deception, it only takes one person brave enough to speak the truth to change everything." From the perspective of an expert in scientific ethics and human values, the story of Ella Brooks is not merely a journey of exposing deceit, but a testament to a profound truth. Intelligence only truly shines when illuminated by conscience. In a world where ambition often clouds reality, the courage to speak what is right remains the purest form of energy humanity will ever need. For not everyone has the chance to change the world, but everyone has the right to refuse silence in the face of wrongdoing.